Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast, where we create space for conversations that heal. I'm your host, Dr. Byron McClure, a nationally certified school psychologist. I, along with our special guests, will give you insight to promote collective healing by putting people first. Through weekly conversations with educators, psychologists, and healers, we'll discuss ways to heal, thrive, and live your best life. This is the Healing Center Conversations podcast. Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast. Today, we have a very special guest in the building. I'm excited to have this conversation. It's been a long time coming. Dr. Katie, welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here with you. Been a longtime fan of your work, so really grateful for this opportunity to share my work and my passion.
Absolutely. It really is my pleasure to have you on. You are many things. You do so much work. Instead of me just going through your bio and reading that, I would love for you in your own words to share. Who is Dr. Katie Raher?
Yeah, well, bringing your A game right away, right off the bat. It's an interesting question to ask who we are. I actually just asked my educator community in our last healing circle, who are you? And it was such a hard question for folks to answer. And I had also sat with it myself on who am I? So it's a complex question. And I'll first share, some of the hats I wear, but I don't think that's necessarily who I am. But I am a teacher turned school psychologist. I am a mama to two highly sensitive kids who honestly are my best teachers every day of my life since having them. I am married to a high school math teacher who shares my views on education and equity. And I also do my work in my business. So I'm the founder of Constant Love and Learning. And in my work, I support educators and other change makers with really taking care of themselves, honoring their own well-being, and developing their own social emotional learnings, so that they can really expand and increase their impact without sacrificing themselves, without sacrificing their health, happiness, wholeness. And so that's really, what I'm all about. But, also who am I at the core? I'm an imperfect, multi-passionate, constantly growing, evolving, spiritually guided woman. I am just trying to make an impact on the world, really one relationship at a time. I'm raw, I'm real, I'm down to earth. I'm a perfectionist in recovery. I'm whole despite all my messiness. That's, it's actually because of all my messiness that makes me whole. I'm also, I would say, what happens when the cycle of poverty and trauma is broken. So my mom grew up in extreme poverty and with extreme trauma. And because of powerful relationships in her life, and powerful educational opportunities, she was able to change course. She was able to heal and really create a life for me that was not possible for, the vast majority of her family as well. And so I think I'm also what can happen when we take time to heal, when we build relationships. So I consider myself a miracle in so many ways because of how much had to happen to change the life trajectory of what could have happened in my mom's world. And she definitely is her story is inspirational in some of what drove me to get into the work that I do and into education as a means for healing. I am also, I think an educator in my blood. I think it's deeply embedded in me. I actually, because of my parents' struggle with infertility, I'm actually donor conceived. Recently, in the past couple of years, through, all the powerful genetic opportunities that are out there to learn about yourself, I have been able to connect with half siblings and learn a bit of my history. And it's really fascinating that the vast majority of my half siblings and me, who all had vastly different upbringings, we are mostly teachers who then became sort of educational leaders. And so it's just fascinating that even though there's, the nurture side of my life that contributed to who I am and my values and my beliefs and all the things that make me, there's also some hardwired things that I think drive just what lights me up inside. And so I'm complex and I'm, ultimately all about love. And, in terms of other lighter stuff, I'm a total smartass. I crack jokes left and right. I also, love to dance sports. I'm a little older now, so I'm not hitting the club anymore. But if, it's more the kitchen is really where the dance parties are now with my kids. And I love to watch sports. My birthday's coming up. We're going to go to a college basketball game. So there's also those kinds of things that make me me, that light me up. So yeah, that's me, not in a nutshell, but I'm also, brevity's not my strong suit. So I'm a talker. That's also seems to be a little genetic. My half siblings have that as well. Anyhow, so that's me.
That is so fascinating on so many different levels. I'm going to toss out our script because I just have so many questions.
No, I want to talk, but I love your script. So anyhow, we'll go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll try to stay on track.
Okay.
But I'm interested. You mentioned, you have siblings. Like, what really pushed you to want to seek out, like your origins, like where you really come from, connecting with the half siblings? Like, was there a light bulb moment, or was there a event that really said, okay, I need to figure out like where I come from? I'm interested to hear.
Actually, that wasn't what drove the connections. When I first found out that I was donor conceived, I did not know most of my life. And when I did find out, of course, I was curious about my history and my health history and sort of my roots in terms of just ancestry and things like that. But I also have an amazing relationship with my dad, who is just all heart, all love, all fun. And I'm grateful for him on so many levels. And so I didn't really feel the need to find whoever else I had, who had donated some stuff to help make me and whatnot. I didn't feel called to do that, but I actually, because of my health journey, which I'm sure we'll dig into a little bit, because that's how I got to doing the work that I do. I actually did 23andMe because I was trying to solve some mysteries in my health, just challenges that I was having. And then, because I had that, then I got a couple emails over the years, and then things unfolded, and it became unpacked for me. And it was healing and powerful in lots of ways, because there's something just really kind of helps you connect more deeply to yourself when you understand that. For example, the first half sibling that I found, at first, actually, my husband was like, be careful, you don't know who's coming to try to, we have to kind of be cautious and connecting perhaps. And so I was cautious. So then I basically cyber stalked this person's name, and it was a pretty generic name. So I had to really dig through all of these names. I did on LinkedIn, Facebook, all the things. And after searching thousands, not thousands, but, probably a good 100 people with this person's name, when I got to the one person who it actually turned out to be, I knew in my bones, in my deepest, knowing that this was the person who was my half sibling, because literally her resume, her steps, and I was, reading on LinkedIn, literally at every place in her life junctures, it was like, oh my gosh, I was deciding between this or that. And it was either we chose the same thing, or she chose the other one that I was considering on my own journey. And then, even when I cyber stalked her on Facebook and could see her pictures and things like that, I mean, we have the same hall entryway decoration. We have a, similar obsession with tea. Like, I've never seen anybody else's kitchen have as many tea boxes as mine. And then I'm like, oh my gosh. And so there was just something about that. And then as each half sibling kind of, was uncovered and I learned more things, it just gave me some answers to some of the things that make me me, just some of my interests, my passions, and also really got me curious about the intersection of nature and nurture, which has always been fascinating to me. Like when I was in undergrad, that was actually, as a human development major, my final project was supposed to be digging into nature versus nurture and exploring that through some particular lens. And now I'm like, I could write a whole book about this in powerful ways. And, because we also have had such vastly different upbringings and experiences and exposures to trauma and not. And it's a fascinating world. So yeah, so it definitely has made it's been a healing part of my journey to understand myself better and know where I came from. So yeah, it's kind of how it's unfolded. And it's still, who knows how many else are out there and what I may learn in the next phase of life. Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that you mentioned is it really helped you to understand your interests. And I want to dive into some of your interests, your passions, what brings you joy and excitement and even frustration and anger and all the things that make you you. I would love if you could to share your story of how your passion, really for all things education, but explicitly around educator well-being, and then this concept of radical self-care. Where did this really come from?
Yeah, well, I will tell you that if you had told me at the start of my career, about 20 years ago in education, that I was going to be somebody on a podcast speaking about educator well-being, I would have laughed at you, because I was the opposite poster child for educator well-being. I was the person who always put myself last, who thought that people who took care of themselves were selfish. Those were the beliefs that I held tight. And so how did it come to be that I do this work? So when I was early on in my education career as a teacher, I started to have a lot of health problems, which is actually what made me leave the classroom. And then I ended up, going to grad school and becoming a school psychologist. And I never thought that taking care of myself was the answer. I just thought it was just a fluke, that I had gotten really sick in terms of physical and mental health. And that was just, it wasn't like I need to take better care of myself. I just needed to learn more and go back to school so that I just never still prioritized myself. And then about 6 years ago or so now, I had continued on my path of self-sacrifice and always putting everybody and everything ahead of me and never really taking care of myself in any way. And, even my grad school friends would probably have told you I was the most workaholic, perfectionistic person there was that they knew, maybe in their lifetime. And so I started to have health problems again, continue to sort of unfold. And, I kind of went to the doctor, thought let me get a quick fix. Nothing was working, and things just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I was also just continuing my path of self-sacrifice. I would stay up all hours of the night, put my kids to sleep, then stay up to work on things for my work and, whatever it was. And then I got to a place where not only was my physical health crashing, all of my body was just in pain chronically, chronic migraines, headaches. And I also then got to the point where I lost my voice for a month, which was really an adventure when you're working in schools and you have two little ones. My kids were 1 and 4 at the time. And my anxiety started to take off in whole new levels. And so I was sleeping terribly. And then it was just this cycle, right? This not sleep deprivation led to worse, and it just, things kept feeding each other. And so one day I had run to this IEP meeting that I was part of, and I had skipped lunch. Pretty normal for me. I had skipped going to the bathroom, even though I had to go to the bathroom. And I show up here, almost, out of breath, having to hold my pee, basically. I'm hungry and can't talk. I'm literally doing type to talk. I'm typing in so that people will hear what I have to say in this IEP meeting. And all of a sudden my body starts to convulse at a level that was pretty scary for me. And I've almost had an out of body experience of my body being, basically telling me, no more, you cannot do this anymore. And my body had been giving me messages, both subtle messages for a long time and louder messages for a while at that point too. But it was basically screaming at me. And it was the first time I really actually listened. And was nope, I can't do this anymore. So in that moment, I was I'm just going to change everything. I'm going to change how I live my life. I can't do this anymore. And then as I unpacked things and healed in lots of ways, mind, body, and spirit, I started to notice how common the pattern was in educators. Even though I may have taken it to all new levels, this was just the norm. This was the patterning and sort of the generational beliefs that have been passed down. This was the system that was handed to us. And so much of my work as a school psychologist was very non-traditional. I did a lot of consultation and intervention work rather than lots of assessment. And in my consultation work, I use a consultation model, which I won't go into all that. But basically, it's not me coming in as an expert telling people what to do. It was always co-created, collaborative problem solving, and really, having the people I was supporting come up with what's going to work for them. But there was always something missing. What was getting in the way of them actually implementing something that they really even believed in? And as I started my own journey, I started to ask additional questions, and I was starting to dig into their well-being. And this was this huge missing piece of why people weren't able to always show up in the ways they wanted to in their classrooms. That was what was missing. And so I kind of shifted how everything went about. I dug into that research as well. And I really started to both intuitively and based on the evidence realize that radical self-care is really how we are going to make much larger changes in schools and in classrooms. It's about disrupting the systems. It's about breaking down these patterns that have been passed down to us, these sort of, patriarchal, white supremacist driven patterns of you should sacrifice yourself. Education really was built largely on the backs of educators, and it's about disrupting that. It's about saying, no, I'm going to show up in my full presence because I have taken time that I deserve to take care of myself. And a story that resonates with me, I was at an acupuncture appointment, and I think I was just kind of even sitting there, and my acupuncture bumped into my arm, and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And she said, "What are you sorry for? You're literally just taking up space in the world the way you're supposed to. You deserve to take up space in this world." And that was something that resonated with me. And I think that as educators, I can speak as a woman. I think also people of color have been told, you're not supposed to take up space. You're supposed to be quiet, make yourself small, kill yourself working to take care of everybody else. And it's that oppressive mindset that has gotten us into a lot of trouble. And so what happens is you look around, so many of the teachers I supported, I would say 95% of them had a chronic disease, autoimmune conditions, cancer, you name it, mental health challenges.
Wow.
Like so many people have, chronic disease, and you can look at the rates in education. There are higher rates of those kinds of things. And I guess no more. Like I had lost my voice on a physical level, but I also realized I had lost my voice on a much deeper level. And I decided no more. I'm not going to be quiet about this anymore. I'm going to stand up for this and empower people to honor their needs, to take space that they deserve to take, to, honor their own needs, to listen to their bodies. And, when I say radical self-care, ultimately, yes, we do need to nurture ourselves. But to me, that's always within a system of collective care. So it's through our opportunities to connect with our common humanity and realize that we're not alone. That is what really empowers us to show up and take space that we deserve to take, to be liberated, and then in turn to liberate the systems we're a part of, to then show up to the kids we work with and the colleagues and the families we work with in ways that are more courageous, more curious, just more aware, more attuned, because we've done the work also within.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of radical self-care, all the knowledge you just dropped is mind-blowing. And I'm thinking about the mass resignation that's currently happening in the space of education right now for all of the reasons that you mentioned. And there's a number of other things we're going to come back to, but one of the things you did, you wrote an article on radical self-care for radical change. And now more than ever, like we need radical change. I would love for you to share your perspective. What is radical self-care? You talked about it a little bit, but why is it needed in this current climate with everything that's happening?
Yeah, and I will say right off the bat that I don't have any easy, clear answers. I think about this on a regular basis, and it is messy. And I think even people who have been thinking about this work before we were in the middle of a global pandemic, and, I would say the racial pandemic's been going on much longer, but, even before the global pandemic in terms of COVID, we were really struggling in lots of ways. And it has obviously taken in at total new heights that we perhaps couldn't have imagined, but in some ways are not surprising as well, because this is just really coming to a head of the many challenges that have been ongoing. And really, I think that collectively being clear about what our beliefs are, what our values are, and standing up for them, I think is a huge piece of the puzzle. No shame or blame around people resigning, because I get it. When I had to leave the classroom many, many years ago because of my own health problems, and I think so many people who are leaving, it's because of that. And the invitation is for anyone who is thinking, should I leave? Should I go? And I think that's based on the research and surveys that have been done, that's a pretty common discussion out there. The invitation is to also surround yourself with support that does empower you to radically take care of yourself, to do this radical self-care and see if that shifts things. Because I think sometimes, really at people's core, they are educators. They get so lit up. They've been dreaming their whole lives to work with children and serve children. And not that that can't look a variety of different ways. And of course, I want people to do that in the ways that they feel called. But to have, seek out supports themselves, and then also for educational leaders within districts to create supports, to create structures that give their teams chances to be heard, to be valued. So this is about creating space. And I know that ultimately so much when I talk to educators, they're like, I don't have time, which I get. They have way too much on their plates. So the question then is, okay, so how can we give them time? What can we take off their plates to give them opportunities to do this? How can we celebrate people taking mental health days instead of, giving awards to the people who work all hours of all the night and things like that? So, broadly, I think the radical change we need is really at a systems level. I mean, I don't even think that's just within schools. I think that's policies. I listened to the podcast episode with your twin who's doing that amazing policy work. I think it's multifaceted what the layers have to happen. But I also think that in my community of educators, when I witness them doing radical self-care, really at the core, they're giving themselves permission to honor their own needs. They're giving themselves permission to take up space. They are getting curious about what their beliefs are, where they've come from, and then challenging those and saying, you know what? Yes, there's hustle and bustle, and the rest of my school is working ridiculous hours to whatever. But you know what? I'm going to speak my voice. I'm going to speak my truth. And that's not what's working for me. That's not working for my students. And I think it creates radical change, sort of one sort of interaction at a time. Because I think for me, when I've witnessed other people do this, I'm like, wow, it's actually possible to set more boundaries. It's possible to speak up and say, that doesn't feel aligned. This is not how we're going to serve our kids. You know what? We're not going to do that this time. We're going to, so it's about boundaries. It's about resting within the hustle and bustle. So it's about saying, you know what? That's too many meetings for that day. Or this is too many reports, or this is too many responsibilities. So this is how much I'm going to do. And let's collectively figure out what the solution is going to be, because I'm not going to kill myself anymore. I want to maintain my work in schools. I want to sustain my impact. And so I want to be able to show up fully. And I should mention that radical is going to look different for different people. For me at this point, radical is looking like, how can I speak up more and like shift things at broad levels? Some people may be feeling so, they're really in survival mode. At this point, maybe it's just something really simple. I know when I was in survival mode, the only thing I changed at first was my beautiful, wonderful acupuncturist who's given me so much wisdom in my lifetime, for the past 6 years. She said, can you just, first thing in the morning, drink a glass of water so you don't end up at the end of the day dehydrated? And I said, okay, I can do that. That'll take 30 seconds. Got it. And that was all I could do for months. But then it also shifted my mindset and started to make me realize I can do little things for myself. So sometimes radical is very tiny, and sometimes radical is bigger. It's radical on a person-to-person basis. And in showing up in ways and speaking our truths about taking care of ourselves and our deservingness and worthiness of that, we empower others to do the same. And I think that's a huge piece of it. And then ultimately, in terms of the radical change, when we interact with children, and on our colleagues and families, it was always so interesting. It's not like everyone out there is educators. I know that they're doing the best they can. We all are doing the best that we can in any given moment. And there's possibilities to even expand that. So I know for me now, when I show up so much more present. People will say that my presence literally helps them feel calmer when I'm in these interactions with people because I've taken care of myself. And I also don't always do a good job of that because I fall back on my own old patterns. We're all going to do that. And so sometimes I'll also notice my energy is really frantic and scattered and stressed. And there's mirror neurons, so we can see the impact that has on our students, our colleagues, and right now there's so much of that overwhelmed, frenetic energy in schools, but we can change that one interaction at a time. And that's what I really believe is powerful. And so holding space for educators to heal and come home to themselves. And to me, in lots of ways, radical self-care is an unlearning of all the things that we've been taught. And that's really how we show up and do our best work with kids. I talk about, self-love to spread love, self-care to spread care as some of my mottos in life.
I love that motto, but everything that you just shared is so practical. I wanted to ask you if there were maybe one or two strategies that our listeners, that educators, or really for anyone could take and start implementing tomorrow. You shared so many as you were talking, but do you have maybe one or two strategies where it's like, look, you can do this. This is my favorite. You can even get started tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that in part, the first step really is giving yourself permission. In my community, we actually sign a permission slip. Like, give yourself permission. It is not selfish to take care of yourself. Actually, it is the least selfish thing you can do. So I think one powerful piece is just to start to shift that mindset and the beliefs around it. Easier said than done. And surrounding yourself with other like-minded folks who believe this can be powerful. I think for me, everybody always loves the simple just drinking a glass of water. It really is a game changer because you start to change your identity. I am someone who is able to take care of myself. Another couple favorites I have, sometimes I have no energy. So literally I do legs up a wall, which just requires you to lay down on the ground, scoot your butt up to the wall, put your legs up the wall, and just literally just rest and do nothing. And the beauty of that one is that, it releases a bunch of the tension in your hips that we often hold. And from also sitting at a desk all day and all the things that we do. It also is great for giving you some healing, even if, say, you've got little ones around at your own house and they're like climbing on you and, you're just breathing it in. So it doesn't take a lot of effort. You're doing that maybe while they're playing, so that's a possibility. Also think one of my all-time favorite things that's really can be quite quick is a self-compassion break. Because ultimately, through it all, we have to greet ourselves with this. And we know actually that one of the best antidotes to compassion fatigue, burnout is self-compassion. And so really, it's just a 3-step process. It can go in any order. I love Kristen Neff's research on all of this. Really, it's about mindfulness, just noticing. What am I feeling? Oh, I'm stressed. I'm suffering. I'm overwhelmed. Whatever it is, just noticing it and naming it. And then also connecting to common humanity, just reminding yourself, I'm not alone. All sorts of other educators are feeling this as well. And then really just sending ourselves loving kindness. Kristen Neff talks about putting our hands on our hearts, which is just, I love because it's that physical connection to our body, which is the place of so much of wisdom within. And it's, may I be kind to myself. May I remember that I'm enough. May I remember I'm worthy of taking this moment. May I be gracious with myself when what I've done isn't perfect, because shifting into that compassionate lens for ourselves, again, has these massive ripple effects on everyone else. This is how we show up with compassion to others. This is how we engage in challenging conversations and healing conversations with others, because if we've treated ourselves with love, it's so much easier to greet others with all their complexities and even perhaps very differing views with compassion. And that's how we then make connections and then grow together and in the process. So those are some of my favorites. There's some other easy ones like get better sleep this is just a simple one. Everyone who's listening right now, go into your phone, go into your iPad and laptop and figure out the night setting and put that on so that the blue light turns off a few hours before bed so you get better sleep. Sleep to me is one of my top tools. When I sleep, everything is better. When I don't sleep, I get cranky and things don't work out so well. So protect your sleep. So those are just some possible tools for you.
Yeah, sleep is one of my favorite ones as well.
Amen.
And I notice for myself when I don't get sleep, especially now while I have a 6-month-old, I still have a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old. And I notice when I don't get sleep, my energy is a little bit different. So that one is super, super critical. And I love the one that I'm going to try the hips on the wall. Like, especially because now I'm working from home, you can sit for a long time. I try to get up and move around, but I just want to try it because I love the name of it. then it seems like it'll actually help a lot. So one of the things that I would love to talk about is constant love and learning. And as you talk about it, I'm also interested to hear if there's a connection. You talked about going to that meeting, you didn't have your voice, you noticed your anxiety increasing to the point to where you're having convulsions. Was there a moment where you said, I have to exit the public school system or the education system? And then did that lead to constant love and learning? I'm interested to hear the development there.
Yeah. I've definitely had thoughts of wanting to leave in multiple ways, especially when I find myself in systems that feel deeply ingrained in problematic patterns. And I know we've all been there. Any of us educators have found ourselves in those systems. And I also have always had this inner knowing that this is also where I'm meant to be. People all the time tell me, you should just do this work for parents or homeschool parents. And I'm like, no, I love the educators. That's like where my soul lights up. So there's also this part of me that wasn't ever ready to go. I do work part-time in schools. And then the other part is where I do the constant love and learning. And the ideas really came to me through sort of intuition. I actually happened to be in a women's circle, a healing circle, as part of my own healing on my health and mental health journey. And in addition to sort of all the conversations that were really rich and helpful, and after moving our bodies, when I would sit in Shavasana, which is, for any of you who are not yoga folks, it's like basically laying there doing nothing on your mat at the end, which is glorious. That's also a top tip. Just lay there and do nothing and give yourself silence and space. I just kept having these intuitive hits and visions of me holding space for educators, where I was in these circles of other educators. And so that was really what was coming to me. And I knew that I wanted to do that more. And I was already in my work as a school psychologist leading groups of educators in terms of mental health consultation. And I was already integrating more of the well-being pieces into that work. So I was already starting to pull in mindfulness and just questions and coaching that would help them connect to radical self-care and taking care of themselves as a means to better show up for their students. And I also had this vision of doing something a little deeper as well. And I also was picturing, you and I, went through the, a PhD program that I'm sure kicked both of our butts to some extent. And I felt like once I actually got really sick and my health spiraled, I kind of dug into the research on health and wellness in that same spirit, not to kick your butt. I went about it a bit of a different way this time. I was a little bit more intentional and mindful and slow in the process, but I feel like I got a self-created PhD in the process and I'm constantly trying to learn more. So I also wanted to bring all that I had learned to educators so that they don't have to go do what I did and figure out what in the heck to do. I wanted to bring it to them. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop. And so ultimately, the love and learning, I guess when I was just playing with possibilities for my business, love and learning were really at the core of me. They're two of my top values. On the VIA character strengths kind of work, love and learning are my two top character strengths. So that's really, again, if I were to say, who am I? That's who I am. And to me, obviously, one major constant in life is change. But also, what are the other two constants for me? It's the love. That's a constant in our lives that helps us get through all the things that are life. And then learning and growing, evolving, that's just what we're all doing all the time. And so I wanted to help educators do that work for themselves, but also, what are we here for? We're here to do it also for our students and one another. And so it's about that. And the word constant came about because in my own healing work, one of my mentors, she would always talk about how, jobs will come and go. And students will come and go. Even our own kids, our own families, people come and go and unfortunately pass. But who is the constant in your life? It's you. And I would also say connected to that constant is I bring a lot of spirituality into my work with educators, which can look at different ways. I call it GUS. So it could be God, universe, source, whatever you believe. And that is also a constant. So it's that connection to yourself going inward that allows us to constantly go and do the magic that we're supposed to all individually do in this world, that we're, really tapping into our gifts. So that's where it comes from. I teach educators social emotional learning tools. I typically train folks in kimochis. It's one of the programs that I am certified in. And so I support folks with that, but also it's the bigger picture. Because to me, social emotional learning, the power comes from our own work as well to really be able to do that magic with kids. So that's where Constant Love and Learning came from. And I do have a vision of impacting, thousands and thousands and thousands of educators. So do I see eventually, as my work grows, could I see myself leaving the part-time work? Yes, so that I could expand and do that work. And for right now, I also love being in schools part-time because I feel like, especially, right now, it helps me have a pulse on what's actually going on in schools. Because even, one of my educators who's a teacher told me once, I was holding space for all the feelings that are coming up in the mess of this past few years. And she said, I know you don't understand, Katie, what it's like to be an educator, a teacher right now, because you were a teacher, 15 years ago. And so you didn't have No Child Left Behind. You didn't have the extreme levels of testing and this and that. And I was like, you're right, I don't. And even though I don't understand what it's like to be a teacher fully anymore, I do still have my foot in the door with schools as a school psychologist, so I get to be in classrooms, so I get a sense, and I love that. And so we will see what unfolds in terms of my next steps as things grow, and I'm just grateful for all the opportunities I've gotten to be able to be in schools and serve in that way, and then also in my business.
Yeah. And so you also have the Whole Heart Ed Collective.
Yes.
Could you talk about that a little bit and break it down?
Yes. So it's really my signature program that I've created. And it's an educator well-being membership. And wholehearted is a word that I love to aspire to. I love Bréne Brown's wholeheartedness definition. Really, it's about, at the end of the day, no matter what unfolds, we're worthy to remember that and to tap into that. And, that ED I capitalized at the end for educators. And it's about tapping into our wholeness and remembering that we're whole no matter what unfolds. And so many of my educators have come to our groups and our healing circles and spoken their truths about their range of feelings right now. And sometimes they'll say, I feel broken. And I hold space for that because I felt the same many a times and still do. And we want to collectively remember our wholeness. And so it's really about supporting the whole educator. It's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, professionally, and holding space for that. And so how that looks is once a month we have healing circles, which are rooted in reflection and connection. So we journal, there's meditation, there's embodiment practices, there's time to connect with others, to share our truths, to really tap into what are our patterns. Where can we heal? So it's that work, and we're doing this, in a collective space together. And there's also group coaching, which is really, I do answer questions for folks. If they have a specific thing, they say, I want support with this. I may say, this is some of my thoughts on it. But ultimately, what we start with always is it's really me just facilitating self-coaching. So it's me asking them questions. The whole thing is really rooted in, yes, you may learn knowledge, but ultimately it's connecting that with that wise wisdom within. So often what happens in educational systems is it's a top down, this is the answer. This is how you're supposed to do it. And yes, we have evidence-based practices and we do want to rely on those kinds of things. And there's never anything that can be so clearly implemented. Everything's always ultimately integrated with our intuition. And intuition integrates science. It integrates those other pieces, integrates a lot of pieces. And so it's about tapping into that. It's about saying, your voice does matter. Your experience, your wisdom does matter. This is how you're going to do it. It's going to look a little different for you. So yes, we may tap into what are we thinking, all the thoughts that are swirling around. We may tap into what we're feeling, and then we're going to tap into that sort of deep inner knowing, because that's so much of where we find that peace. So it's trusting that's there, because so often, again, we've been made to distrust ourselves because of the powers that be. And this is about shifting that and having people return to self-trust. And it's a community really of very like-hearted, like-souled, very soul-led individuals. So It's folks who want to do this work and want to heal. And then on the other weeks of the month, there's opportunities for I do new trainings, share new resources. So, I always have once a month, they get a meditation and a quick and easy practice. So they can also just cultivate their well-being through that way and try out different things, see what they like. Last month, there was a training all about top tools to help support with quality sleep. This month is going to be really about the language we use and the way it shapes our thinking and the way it shapes our how we move through the world. Last month, as a resource, we talked about the Enneagram. So things like that. So we kind of just dig into different possibilities for those things as well. And so I kind of bring that to them. I ask them what they want to know about, what do they want to learn. And also if people are struggling in certain ways, I'm like, okay, well, let's do it. I'm going to bring a self-compassion meditation. If it's something a little harder, people are like, I'm just feeling frenetic energy. We did a movement practice, or I've shared some EFT tapping. Tapping's another one of my favorite things in the world. So it's like coming together and bringing them to a one-stop shop. And then it's really about holding space for them to do the work that they want to do and desire to do. And my hope for the future is also to create a sort of secondary program which will be about wholehearted leaders, so that I can support other people who want to lead this work in their schools. So it's not like people have to just come to me. And I love doing systems work. I consult with districts around things, around their well-being practices and supporting educators at a systemic level. And I also believe if we can support mental health professionals in holding space in their communities, it can be powerful. And, I know as a school psychologist, I was always trained in consultation. We're only talking about work-related problems. If it's like personal stuff, we send them to a therapist. It's kind of how I, in a nutshell, how I was trained. And it's not like I'm leading therapy, but it is a space where people can show up in their wholeness. People aren't coming and talking about their spouses or their kids, in extensive ways, but we're talking about how does it affect your work as an educator? How does all the parts of you come together to do that? And that is important. And I think that is within our professional realm of support. And I don't think most of us got that training in our graduate programs. And so my hope is also to lead people in doing the work themselves and then also leading it. So that's hopes for the future.
Yeah. And so this is the Healing Centered Conversations podcast. And Katie, I would love to hear, what does healing mean to you?
Such a great question. And I've been loving hearing all the different versions that folks have shared on your podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, well, after I go, I want to hear what you have to say too. So, all right, deal?
Absolutely.
Okay. So for me, really healing is about relationships and love. And it boils down to your relationship first with yourself, and then also your relationships with others. And it's through the intersection of all the relationships we have that we do heal. For example, my mom healed because of powerful relationships that helps heal that trauma and that work. And we know that that's a huge piece of healing. And I also believe that healing is deep within. And for me, it's also guided by my spirituality. It's my relationship with my mind, body, and spirit. And my capacity to heal inward was also maximized and optimized by that healing in community. So even though I had done so much work to heal my body because of all my chronic health conditions that I unfolded, my autoimmune conditions, my anxiety, all the things. And yes, that was powerful, but it was also about knowing I'm not the only person going through this. I'm not the only person who beats myself up and is critical of myself all the time, which drives me in doing some of these things that can get me into these patterns that are troubling for my health and mental health. Oh, you do that too? And so, you feel that too. So that is power. It's that collective healing that is key. And it was really like even nourishing my body. It wasn't just about taking steps. Like say, for example, even when I just started drinking water, it was about healing the relationship with myself, that believing that I was worthy of taking time to take care of myself. So it's about love with ourselves, self-love, and then being held within love to heal as well. And what about you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I appreciate your perspective on healing. Honestly, Katie, my thinking around healing since I've launched this podcast has evolved tremendously, even from where it was to where it is now. Just because, I've had on politicians, aka my brother, I've had breast surgeons, I've had pediatricians, I've had healers, coaches, I've had psychologists, and everyone has their version of healing. And so I've kind of taken pieces from each one of their unique perspectives and backgrounds and blended it with mine. And what's interesting, I don't think I've ever actually shared like my definition. So this is a first. This is a Healing Centered Conversations first. And so to me, healing is, as I've always said, it's a process. It's a journey that is deeply personal. I've also evolved my thinking to recognize that healing it has to involve restoration from some harm that has occurred, whether that's an individual harm or trauma to a collective harm or trauma that may or may have been perceived. And I think once you can acknowledge whatever harm has been caused, that restoration has to happen through a conversation, through therapy, through whatever it is. And then that healing is coming out of that dark tunnel into a place of healing, of happiness, of hope, of optimism, of thriving. And when you can tap into that, not only can you have healing for yourself, not only do you have collective healing, but you can then start using your testimony as a story to help others heal. So right now in this podcast, that's what healing means to me.
That's beautiful. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
grateful that, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, and I'm grateful that you were able to share that. Like, it's a kind of nice package of all that you've learned. So that was beautiful.
Yeah, and it's constantly evolving. I mean, I've had a lot of guests on, and what's interesting, and I didn't anticipate it, but the amount of spirituality that's discussed on this podcast. Like I was approaching it from just a mental health perspective, even a physical perspective, but the amount of spirituality that has come up with a lot of the guests has really been surprising to me, especially in my background. Like my father's a minister. I've shared that on the episode. In my conversation with Dr. Charles Barrett, who's a school psychologist, shout out to Dr. Barrett. He talks about the spirituality component. I talked about it with the breast surgeon. I didn't expect to really lean on this as a form of healing, but it absolutely is. And it's something that really resonates with me. So it was surprising, but not surprising to hear you talk about it and the connection that you have with the spiritual component too. And I love the term Gus that you explained. God, the universe, and spirit. Is that right?
God, universe, source, or self, whatever.
And source.
And I borrowed that from one of my coaches, Danny Kenny, who has led me in a lot of my spiritual work as well. And so, yeah, I love the term because it's, even though I believe in God, that's my form of spirituality. I want to hold space for people to connect with their spirituality in whatever form. And so often spirituality and religion get confounded. And I think that's a challenge because I think spirituality is powerful on so many levels for not just adults, but even for our kids. Sarah Trubridge and Educating the New Humanity talks a little bit about this in terms of spirituality should be brought into schools more. And I know that a lot of folks would have resistance to that, but it's about that connection within. And there's nothing religious about that. That's something we all need to do so that we can, like you said, lead to things like hope and optimism and coming out in ways that we feel like we're thriving, because that's what we need in life. Because look at what we're all going through right now. There's some dark times.
Absolutely.
So yeah, powerful stuff.
Yeah. And that part is important to me because we can get stuck in the trauma. We can get stuck in the darkness of it all. But at some point, like, we have to move towards hope. We have to move towards what's possible, and then lead a life that's thriving. And so that's we can't miss that piece, which is so important. So as we come to a close, any closing thoughts that you want to share?
I just want to say I'm grateful for all that you're doing and having these conversations because, like you said, it happens through this connection and these conversations. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to have my voice heard and do the work that I envisioned. And it's really a calling that was placed on my heart and soul. So thank you so much. I will also mention I wanted to offer, if people are interested in checking out the Wholehearted Collective, they, can use a coupon code gratitude because I'm grateful for all the work folks are doing and showing up for our educational systems and for our students, and they can get 20% off any of for the membership if they would like to join. I really want to make sure to get this work out to folks so that we do have more healing in our systems, because I think this is really, again, how we disrupt the systems that are problematic is one person, one healing conversation at a time. So again, I'm grateful for you and all that you're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How can people find you on social media or your own website?
Yeah, it's www.constantloveandlearning.com. Also Instagram, constantloveandlearning_ is the handle, and Facebook, Facebook, and then / or whatever it is, / whatever the thing is, Constant Love and Learning. So that's usually where you can find me.
Awesome. And we'll include all the links in the show notes. Katie, thank you so much for this healing-centered conversation.
Thank you.
To our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, take care, everyone.